Welcome back, everybody, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We are, as we are wont to do, generally about once a month, we're answering your questions. And as is frequently the case, my colleague Shannon Vasconcellos, who's a former financial aid officer at both Boston University and Tufts University, is joining me. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Beth.
Thanks for being here, as always.
Sure.
All right, we're starting with one for me because
Okay.
I just feel like it today.
Yeah, why not? So Leslie asks, when will we know if University of California schools and California state universities will be test optional or even test blind for fall 2022 admission? So that's this year's juniors in high school, right?
Yep. We don't know. We have no idea. So there was a lawsuit that was, so California state system went test blind back much earlier this fall. University of California was test optional, and then there was a court ruling that said they had to be test blind this year because not everyone had an opportunity to test, and therefore it was discriminatory to even consider test scores from anyone. Then they contested it in the courts, and so far they have had no luck. So they have thrown their hands in the air and said, we're not going to contest this anymore right now because we're about to start reading applications. And so we're test blind for the year. We have no idea what's going to happen in 2022. What we do know is that at the very least, they're going to be test optional because they had already made that decision before COVID ever hit. They had said they were going to be test optional, but we have no idea if the Cal State system is going to be test blind. We have no idea if the UC system will be test blind. I am the mother of a junior. He is not applying to the University of California system. However, I am having him prep for and take the tests because what I don't want to have happen is I don't want him to be held back and not be able to apply somewhere because they are going to be requiring tests and he doesn't have them. So from my perspective, I'd like him to have all options open. And until I see more colleges coming out and saying, we're definitely going to be test optional next year, or even we're going to consider going test blind, I'm sort of proceeding as if he is going to be submitting scores to at least some of the schools on his list. So, Leslie, I know you're kind of wondering and hoping that maybe your daughter isn't going to have to test, but in this situation, I can't give you those assurances, and we don't know when the UC will make that call for 2022. But if I were a betting woman, I would say it won't be for a while. Yeah, so, all right. Shannon. This question comes to us from Ben. What is the best time to let a school know about a change in income due to COVID?
Immediately, I would say. So for parents, Ben, I don't know if you're a student or a parent, if you're of a high school senior who is applying for college admission and applying for financial aid right now, I would let the school know right now, if that's the case. Right when you're submitting your financial aid application, I would let them know about a loss of income. For folks who maybe haven't filled out the financial aid applications yet, they might not realize that your financial aid application will ask you about your income from 2 years prior to the year you're applying for aid for. So for the school year that's starting in 2021, those students are applying to college right now and applying for financial aid. They're asking about 2019 income before COVID even hit in the US. So a lot of people have lost income since 2019. And those are circumstances you absolutely want to bring up to the financial aid office. Ask them to take under consideration. They're not required to, but they can at their discretion. So you absolutely want to ask the question. There are kind of two different points in times where you could bring up a loss in income. The one is, as I suggest, right initially when you're applying for financial aid, you're submitting your FAFSA form, maybe the CSS profile form. At right about the same time, send in an email explaining your loss of income, document it. The financial aid offices love documentation, facts, figures, all of that good stuff. I would let them know right up front, and you hope they take it into consideration up front. There is a possibility that they don't. There are some schools that really won't even look at special circumstances up front. They're just going to do a straight calculation based on the FAFSA. If that's the case, you can always let them know on the back end, once you receive your financial aid offer, if you don't like the looks of it, go back to them on the back end and say, hey, could you reconsider based on this loss of income that I had? So those are the 2 points in times you could let them know. I would actually advocate letting them know upfront. You hope they take it into account upfront. They may or may not. If you don't like the looks of the offer that they send you, don't hesitate to go back to them again on the back end and say, hey, remember me? Could you take a second look? I'd appreciate it because I had this loss of income. I say let them know up front because schools are hurting these days financially. They may run out of money. So I don't know how generous they're going to be on the front end, on the back end, but I would let them know right up front and hope they take it into consideration. But if they don't hesitate to go back again on the back end.
Right. You shouldn't assume, well, I already gave them the additional information and clearly they didn't care. You can always call. They will not rescind the money they've already provided or your child's offer of admission.
Never, ever hurts to ask. I would
No.
absolutely do that.
All right.
All right. So we have a question for you, Beth, from Laura. Actually, a couple questions. So she says, first, when will colleges have more data about enrollment for this year's freshman class? When will they post deferrals, average ACT scores, etc.? And then do you want to take that first?
Yeah, let me take that one. So I'm not exactly sure when this one came in. So Laura, I suspect you may have been referring to the class that is currently enrolled as freshmen in college. Not all colleges are going to list that data on their websites. The UC system does provide the data on each of the schools. And I can tell you that for deferrals, I don't think you're going to find most schools providing that data. The UCs in particular, in general, I don't know what the policy is at each school. I know that Berkeley rarely grants deferrals. I know that UCLA does not grant deferrals. And I suspect that that is the case at most of the UCs. It's not uncommon at public schools not to grant deferrals. Right here in Massachusetts, your alma mater, Shannon, University of Massachusetts Amherst, does not grant deferrals, period. It has nothing to do with COVID. They just don't do them. So I think if you're looking for deferral information, you are likely to be looking in vain. But I also feel like the reason you probably want to know is you're concerned about how much more difficult it might be for your child to get in. And all I can say is this is not something you can control. And so I'm not even sure that the information would be particularly helpful. We've written a number of blogs about this. What we are finding is that it is at many schools, they are saying this is not going to impact our decisions this year. And honestly, even if it does, there's literally nothing you can do about it. So I would just kind of let that go. There is a place that you can go, Big Future, which is the College Board's, an arm of the College Board. They do try to collect all of the reported information that colleges have put out there and provide things like average ACT score, average SAT scores, in, you know, how many students applied, how many enrolled. So that can be a good resource. And the common data set can be a good resource as well.
Absolutely. And Laura's follow-up question was, as of now, it seems the UC system will not be considering test scores at all. We just talked about that. That's correct. Yes. If a student has a really strong test score, though, is there a clever, for those of you listening on your phone, I'm making air quotes, is there a clever way to share that information within the application? So UCs have said they're not going to look at them, but can you sneak them in there anyway if you want to?
Here's what I can tell you. When a school is test blind, you could do your level best to sneak information in and think that you're being clever, and it's not going to be a factor. So my gut reaction to that is, no, there is not, and I wouldn't suggest it, even if I thought there was a way to do it. You know, certainly you could put them in the additional information section. You could weave them into an essay, but it is going to be to the detriment of the student. Or it could be anyway. I've never seen a student talk about test scores in an essay before, and I can't imagine a context in which it would be particularly valuable if the sole purpose was to share that they were very strong. We've said it many times, for schools that are of the more selective variety, where a very high test score is going to impact the, you know, is going to be a significant part of the consideration. having a great test score doesn't automatically make you someone that they're like, oh my goodness, we weren't sure about this kid, but now that I can see they have 750, we definitely want them. If they're test optional, they're not considering test scores for anyone. The UC system is very upfront and transparent about how they make decisions, and they will not be using test scores this year to make decisions. If a school is test optional and the scores are great, then by all means, go ahead, send the scores, and that will certainly be a positive factor. But if they're test blind, they're not going to be considered. So I would step away from the idea of finding a way to get them in there. I don't think that's going to be helpful at all. And like I said, it could hurt.
Yeah, I mean, with the courts being involved, and the courts have told the University of California that using test scores would be discriminatory. If you manage to sneak it in there, there's no way that they are they're going to risk another lawsuit just to consider your test scores. You weren't going to get in, but they snuck these nice test scores in. I don't see that happening.
No, that's exactly right. It's not happening. So don't do it. Okay. Next question comes to us from Lainey. Lainey says, my ex-husband and I are planning on splitting college costs. Do we both go on the financial aid applications?
Probably not. So the main financial aid application, as you might know, is the FAFSA form. The FAFSA form, when parents are divorced, they specifically say report the financial information of your custodial parent. How they define custodial, and they explain this, is the parent you lived with the majority of the time in the past year. That is the only parent's information that they want. They do not want your non-custodial parent. And again, this is just who did you live with more. They don't care what any actual custody agreement says. If you happened to live with each parent exactly equally, they say as like the tiebreaker factor, report the information of the parent who provided more financial support. But that's only in the case of a tie of living exactly the same amount of time with each parent. So the FAFSA, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, given that there are 365 days in a year, which is not divisible by 2, that should never happen, right?
Right, exactly. Okay. Yes, good point.
Okay.
So they're just looking for the information of the custodial parent. If the custodial parent is remarried, they will also ask for the information of the custodial parent's spouse, so your step parent. If there is a step parent in that household, it's essentially the financial information of that entire custodial household. Non-custodial parent is invisible if you are applying to schools that just require the FAFSA form. If you are applying to any schools that require the CSS profile form, it's an additional financial aid application that about 200 almost entirely private colleges, some of the more selective kind of big brand name ones, require this extra form, the profile. Many schools that require the profile also require non-custodial parent information. So it will come down to what schools your child is applying to. Most schools, the vast majority of schools, it's just the FAFSA, just the custodial parent. But if your child does end up applying to schools that want the profile, that's when the non-custodial parent could enter the picture. The other thing I will say, because you did mention you're splitting college costs, we really get into the weeds here, but just so you know, the FAFSA form, the only way kind of non-custodial parent enters the picture sometimes on the FAFSA is the FAFSA does ask the student, did they receive any gifts or have any bills paid on their behalf by anyone other than their custodial parents? And they even put kind of fine print in like, hey students, this includes your non-custodial parent in case you were going to overlook that. So if non-custodial parent is paying the tuition bill, that shows that amount that he or she pays shows up on a future financial aid application 2 years in the future. For financial aid purposes, if you were going to split the costs, it would make the most sense for the custodial parent to pay for the first couple of years, the non-custodial parent to pay for the last couple of years. That is for financial aid purposes only. There's a whole lot of reasons why you might not want to do that. The student could drop out of school after the first year and only one parent has paid for anything, or tuition tends to increase each year. Now the person who pays on the back end pays more. So there's lots of reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, but for financial aid purposes only, that would be the ideal split.
Got it. And I should make note, because I'm sure there's somebody out there listening saying, well, in a leap year, there actually is an even number of days. But the reality is, did you spend one night longer with one
Yeah,
parent than the other? And
exactly.
if one of you does better, sort of makes more money than the other, you might want to think about being intentional about that one
Yes,
night, right? Being with the
exactly right.
parent who
Yes,
earns less. Okay.
correct.
All right, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're just going to go right to answering more of your questions. So don't go away.